So we have this balance between 1/4 for pumping power. So if we want to save energy in pumping blood, we want large vessels, but if we have to maintain these vessels in the blood, we want smaller vessels, so there's some balance. And so we want to find the diameter which minimizes the total power, which we write as A/d⁴ plus B times d squared, where A and B are initially arbitrary constants. So we can take dHTD and try to find the extremum of H. We set that to 0, right? Using calculus, we just find the extremum. And so our solution in the end is that Q goes like d cubed. So flow goes like diameter cubed, and that's the cube law or Murray's law. Okay. So then you can look at data, and here is a graph from a paper by Kassab in AJP in 2006. And so he looked at, for different tissues, different animals, some arteries and veins. He looked at how basically flow and diameter are related in different vessels. And it's a log-log scale. And the slope here, the average of it is around 3. And for different cases, he found that the scaling exponent delta, which Murray's law says should be 3, is generally in the range of 2 to 4. So on average, Murray's law is fairly closely observed, but there is some variation in that. So it depends on, peculiarities of what type of tissue it is, what type of vessel, and various things, and what size it is. But there is some general scaling law that you can see is obeyed. Okay. So from Poiseuille's law, from this steady flow relationship, this pressure flow relationship and steady flow, we got Murray's law. But now, if we want to study flow in arteries, since the heart is an oscillatory pump, we want to think about pulsatile flow. The rigid Womersley flow is a first way to study pulsatile flow. So that's using a rigid vessel with oscillatory flow. So this is a pulsatile version of Poiseuille flow that was the solutions were first found in the 1920s. It assumes a sinusoidally oscillating viscous flow, a rigid tube or vessel, and flow only along the direction of the tube, so just unidirectional flow. It describes local pulsatile flow, but not pulse waves. So we just want to know initially what the pressure flow relationship is in a single vessel. Okay, we're not worrying about how the pulse wave travels down the circulation. And so one thing that comes out of this analysis is you get something called the Womersley number. So this alpha is the vessel radius r times the square root of omega over nu, where omega is the angular frequency, so that would be 2 pi f, if f is the frequency. And then nu is this kinematic viscosity, which is mu dynamic viscosity over the density rho. So alpha is r root omega over nu. It determines the general characteristics of pulsatile flow. And so that's true for rigid Womersley flow. And then even if we had pulsatile flow in an elastic vessel, alpha would still be an important parameter. Okay. So here's some animations that show what happens as alpha increases. So here's for alpha equals 1, we have essentially, it's like Poiseuille flow, it's like parabolic flow that's just oscillating slowly in time. If we increase alpha a bit, we can see that there's little bumps near the wall. So it's not quite the same as normal pulsatile flow. There's a little bit of a lag between flow in the center and flow near the walls. If we go alpha equals 5 now, you can see that we get sort of almost plug flow in the middle, and then we get more of a difference in phase between the wall and the center, okay? And now if we go to fairly high Womersley number, alpha equals 30, we get these sort of sharp spikes near the wall with plug flow near the middle, and the spikes are pretty close to the wall and fairly large. So that's much different than simply oscillating Poiseuille flow. Okay, so you can see how things change as Womersley number increases. And just some examples of Womersley number. So if you look at the carotid artery at rest, standard heart rate of 60 beats per minute, you look at the diameter, normal viscosity, density of blood, we calculate alpha, right, r root omega nu, then we end up with a Womersley number of about 4.5, so that's fairly low. Now, if we look at the aorta during exercise, so we have a larger vessel, so a larger radius. We have a higher frequency, higher heart rate. If we now calculate alpha, we get a Womersley number for about 25. And so that's going to have a much different characteristic than this flow in the carotid at rest. Okay, so you can calculate under different conditions the Womersley number in different vessels, and you expect the flow profiles as they're oscillating to have different characteristics for different alphas. Okay, so some characteristics of rigid Womersley flow. For low alpha, it's like oscillating Poiseuille flow. Pressure and flow are mostly in sync. For medium alpha, you get complex behavior where the flow profile flattens in the middle, and you get the wall and the core behavior not completely in sync. If you get high Womersley number, you get plug leg profiles for most of the lumen, and then you get peaks that increase and approach the wall as alpha increases. So what we're seeing overall now for rigid Womersley flow is that resistance has become complex. So instead of just having a resistance to flow, you also have a change in phase between pressure and flow, and that's called impedance. So you have a resistance, instead of a resistance, you have an impedance. And so the pressure flow relationship is similar to Poiseuille, but you have this time lag now that increases with Womersley number. So you have resistance due to viscosity, but you also have a lag between pressure and flow, and the lag is different between the center of the vessel and the walls. Okay, so here now, some pictures for alpha equals 2.5 and alpha equals 10 of how the velocity, the phase of the velocity depends on the radius and also the Womersley number. So here now, here's the purple is the pressure gradient over a cycle. So this is time in x. And now here is the pressure gradient. And you can see that at low Womersley number, the wall velocity and the center velocity are almost in phase with the pressure, but there's a slight more of a lag at the center than near the wall. As you go to alpha equals 10, velocities at the center and at the wall have more of a lag relative to the pressure, but still the wall velocity is closer to the pressure gradient in time, and the center velocity has more of a lag. Okay, so as alpha increases, you get more of a time lag overall between velocity and pressure, and then the differences between the center velocity and the wall velocity become greater as alpha increases. Okay, so that's rigid Womersley flow. All right, so that's everything I want to talk about today. I have 3 summary slides. So we talked about blood being a complex fluid made up mainly of liquid plasma and discrete red cells. So those are the 2 important components for flow. Hematocrit and shear rate can affect blood viscosity, and other things like age and your fitness level or your cholesterol can affect viscosity. We saw that blood vessels are complex structures with multiple layers, and they have passive and active elements. So they have like elastin fibers that are passive, but they have endothelial cells that are active, can sense shear and release substances. They have smooth muscle cells that can contract and relax to change vessel diameter. We saw that fluid flow in a vessel depends on the pressure difference and the resistance. So Q is delta P over R. Viscous flow resistance we saw was due to frictional losses as fluid elements pass over each other at different velocities or pass over the wall. Second summary slide, we saw that shear stress or shear force, tau, is viscosity times shear rate, gamma dot. We saw that a balance of shear stress and pressure forces give the parabolic velocity profile that you see in Poiseuille flow. It gives the Poiseuille resistance law. We saw that Poiseuille's law gives the resistance to steady viscous flow in tubes or vessels. And so this gives us the mean or the average pressure flow relationship in blood vessels. We saw that the laminar or turbulent nature of fluid flow is determined by geometry and by the Reynolds number. Most blood flow has a relatively low Reynolds number and therefore is not turbulent. Okay, summary 3. An optimal balance between energy to pump blood and energy to maintain blood vessels and blood gives Murray's law. So this is blood flow proportional to diameter cubed. We saw that Murray's law generally applies with some variations in this cubic exponent. We looked at the basic properties of pulsatile flow in arteries, and we saw that they can be initially understood using the rigid Womersley flow model. So this is oscillatory flow, but with a rigid vessel where the walls don't change their position with pressure changes. The rigid Womersley flow solution shows that the inertia of blood causes a time lag between oscillating pressure and flow changes, in addition to the viscous resistance that we see in steady flow. So for steady flow, we just have viscous resistance, but for oscillating flow, we have this inertia effect that causes this lag between pressure and flow changes. And we saw that that effect is greater in the center of the vessel compared to the wall. As Womersley number alpha increases, the importance of inertia increases, and velocity profiles become more plug-like at the vessel center with a large peak near the vessel walls. Okay, finally, rigid Womersley flow does not describe waves traveling down the arterial tree. So to describe that, we would need a full description of pulsatile flow that includes elastic vessels with the elastic Womersley model. So that's all I wanted to say, and I hope you've enjoyed this lecture, and thanks.